Now, most of the time when I use the copy activity, I'm taking data from a source and just doing a straight copy, normally into a table in SQL Server, for example. But with using a store procedure, I can maybe apply some additional processing or logic, or maybe add some columns to my data set. And so I wanted to share a little bit about how to do this. It's a little bit tricky to do, so I thought that this would be a really useful post and a good way to explain how to do it. So now, in order to use the store procedure sync, we need to set up a few things first ahead of time. And so I've kind of listed that out here on this screenshot here. Part of the trick to using the store procedure is that we do need to define in our target database a user-defined table type. So this is a user-defined data type that has the structure of a table. And we want this user-defined table type to have similar structure to our incoming source data. So ultimately, in a few more steps, we're going to map our source data to this table type. Then we need to create our store procedure, and then we will create a parameter in that store procedure using this data type, and I'll show this in a second. And then the last piece of the trick here really is setting up your target data set within ADF to use this store procedure. So looking at this screenshot here, this is an illustration of SQL Server Management Studio. I've created, in this case, a user-defined table data type that I called stage.passingType. So stage is my schema name, and passing type is the name of the data type. And so these are the columns that I've defined here, and in my situation, in my case here, these align very closely to the file data that I'm importing into my database. So again, this is my table data type with those columns defined. Now, once I've got that table data type defined, I want to go ahead and move on and create my stored procedure. So inside this stored procedure, I might have some logic. At a minimum, maybe I want to add some metadata from the ADF process to my target table. So you can see in my stored procedure here, I'm doing a pretty simple insert. But I can maybe call out to some functions, maybe do some data cleansing, maybe get rid of some values that I don't want. Anything you can do in a stored procedure, really, I can do in here. Now, the key here is at the very beginning, up at the top there, I've created a parameter using that data type that I created earlier. And the parameter name that I chose here was just passing. That's the name of my parameter. Now, you want to take note of that parameter because we're going to need that in just a second. Okay? So the next thing I need to do before I can get into the copy activity is configure my target data set in Data Factory. And this is a little bit tricky, but what I want to do is where it says to choose a table, I actually want to provide the name of the parameter that I used in my stored procedure. So the stored procedure has a parameter of a user-defined table type, and it's the name of that parameter here that I put into that table name. Okay, so if I hit that preview data button, it actually won't work because I don't have a table in my database that's just called passing. Okay. The other key here is on the schema. When I define the schema here, I'm really mapping or including the schema of the user-defined table type and not the target table. Okay, so that's another important key here. Now, once I have that all set up, now I'm ready to move on to the copy activity. The copy activity, I'll go ahead and choose my store procedure that I defined from my list of store procedures. And I'd like to use the import parameter button. And when I do that, if this is done right, it should recognize that I have a parameter of the table type. Now, in my case, I had to add the schema name to my data type there. So again, this is the name of the data type of that parameter and not the name of the parameter. Okay, so in my case here, I had a schema name in front of my data type name, and that's what I've shown here. Then the final thing then is the mapping, and here you're mapping the source, in my case from my file, the source columns to the columns in that user-defined table data type. A little bit tricky, but I hope you found this overview of how to use a store procedure as a sync in Azure Data Factory helpful. If you have any questions about this or Azure Data Factory, please reach out, let us know. Thank you.